have a copy of the agenda? Where's the copy of the agenda? I give them all back to you. Or do I have it? No, I don't have it.
You want the agenda?
Yeah, just so I can mark off where we are.
Likewise. Excellent. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome to the August 27th, 2024 meeting of the Porter County Redevelopment Commission. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, please.
Barb Regnetz.
Here.
Bill Herring.
Here.
Ralph Neff.
Here.
Andy Maletta. Jason Gilliana. Michael Brickner. Matt President, you have a quorum.
Okay. Would you read through the consent agenda, please?
The consent agenda has the approval of your minutes for your July 30th meeting, your financial report, and approval of claims. End of consent agenda.
Board, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, South Haven TIF update.
I believe, is that Mr. Brust here? Yes.
Come up here.
Yes.
I'd like to
Update. Tim Brust with Will.
Nice to meet
Nice-
you.
Thank you.
Barb Regnetz.
Yep. You want to?
Why
Why don't you take my spot, Tim?
No. Go ahead.
You can sit over here.
Take the phone, the microphone.
Okay, I'm Tim Brust with Willie Steiner and Brust, and a quick update as far as progress and stuff to date. Initially, I sent out letters to all the property owners that we were interested in talking about with the TIF district. Have heard from a couple. Usually, what I found in the past, it usually takes a couple of letters. Unfortunately, in this day and age, in the good old days, you could knock on doors and stuff, and that's not the best approach anymore, it seems like. And there's not as many landlines, so trying to do some investigative work to get cell phones and things. But have contacted several so far. If I haven't heard from certain people by the end of this week, I will send out a second letter just as a follow-up. Basically, it's to offer, if they want to meet in person, if they want to talk by phone, a Zoom call, or anything, just to get some general information on it. So I would say responses so far have been about as expected. The couple of questions that have come up so far is, a little bit about, will there be a zoning change that comes with that fairly quickly, and what will it do to taxes, which is, if we go to light industrial, that's a different zoning, but there are certain ways to protect or to give them an option there so they don't want to not participate. And a couple of other quick things I wanted to mention. I am going to go ahead and reach out to the golf course owner, since that's such a large parcel right in the center of everything. Since they're no longer operating anymore, to me it'd certainly be worth their while. They should be very interested. And another question I had is there anything to prevent us from talking to the property owner on the northeast corner of Highway 6 and 149? It would be just across from where the Casey's is, but that recently has a new owner. It's my understanding they purchased it with no specific plans or anything in mind, but it would actually be an ideal commercial corner with frontage both on 6 and 149. So I can certainly reach out to them as well if it's of interest, but didn't know if there was any no desire to cross over 149 there.
Well, we had even talked about creating a new tip to the east,
Okay.
or tip, so.
Yeah. That.
Does anybody see a problem with him? Just expanding a little bit?
Having conversations.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the challenge is you go further east, there's a lot of low area there, a lot of floodplain and a lot of topography challenges. So there's, as far as an actual usable acreage on the east side of 149, there's not as much there. So the west side obviously works a lot better. But so I guess at this point, I don't know if you have any answers as far as like, you know, with a zoning change or for taxes or anything, if there any response at this point you'd like me to relay, or just something we would discuss in the future with the owners.
I'm gonna have Scott and possibly Mary Jane talk about that.
I
In
think
terms of
conversation should be just the who, what, where's, that what exists,
Sure.
the appetite to go into it, what they have envisioned for the property.
Sure.
I think that'll give us a whole lot more information than
Okay.
you know, don't know if it's going to be a farm or a subdivision, if there's 5 people fighting over it, or
Sure.
whatever this scenario is, or somebody bought it, they don't plan on moving anytime soon.
Yep. Okay.
We get kind of the groundwork laid to give us a better opportunity to be able to approach them if we did need to approach them for something.
yeah.
Okay.
What did we do anything for Casey's?
As far as
Any incentive whatsoever?
no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it just starts currently north of Casey's property line and then goes all the way about 50 acres north of that is what's already in place.
Correct. Casey's is in the tip.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to understand is, what are we offering? What is Tim supposed to say to these property owners? What are we offering to them that would?
What do we tell them? What, 10 years ago or whatever when this thing started? Right?
We didn't. The property owner approached us.
Right, but
Okay.
he's now approaching a number of different
Right.
property owners.
Okay.
So he's just finding out, are they interested in doing any sort of?
Right. That's why we see the
Tip.
base information. Because
Right.
the original scenario was the property owner came to us, or we went to him because it hadn't been developed in a long time.
Yeah.
He had, maybe Casey's was already banging at the door or not, but it was the anchor to be able to make that area work.
Sure.
And that's why we had the developer participation with that.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the minutes, I just want to indicate that Mike Brickner has joined us. Thanks, Mike.
And typically in the past, I guess some of the incentives, if somebody wanted to be in a TIF district, is depending longer term what their plans are. If they, you know, whether it's a year from now or 5 years from now, if they ever envision selling, it has the potential to increase the property value substantially. You know, you are going to have certain owners who are anti-development, who would rather donate it to a not-for-profit or put a restriction or something on it before they'd like to see it develop. But that's usually, typically once I find out if there's any interest in that, commercial land like up there north of Casey's and stuff is their asking prices in the $50,000 to $60,000 an acre, versus it'd be probably a third of that or less if these other property owners sold it just as it sits today. So,
But you say that the main owner of all this owns a golf course as well.
No.
He owns the most land of it all.
acreage wise, I think there's a couple hundred acres there.
Yeah, I mean, the golf course is there, and
right.
2 of the parcels on the west side and the south side are his,
right.
And that constitutes the biggest portion of
right.
one owner.
Yep.
How the other owners get involved in it? Were they the owners then, or become the owners since?
Well, they haven't been involved yet. They're just by being adjacent to the property, I think, or to create a whole district, I believe.
Right. So I just was trying to figure out who was the person that approached us. I thought it was a guy down in the south.
I'm not even sure
East corner.
Talking about it.
Well, the
Are
south.
we talking about the corner, the 6 and 49? I mean, it's the 6 and 149. That agreement that we actually have a TIF.
No.
Or are we talking about the entire area that we have a district or, we have a territory over.
I understood that you were referring to the district.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Coolwood Associates property has already been in there for a couple of years now. So.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I guess, yeah, I would expect within the next week to 10 days to have a lot more direct conversations and get indications from people if they're adamantly opposed, willing to listen or on board with it and stuff. And I certainly report back at your next or by email through Mary Jane or whatever the best method is.
With the property on the east side of 149, right?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt to talk to them. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So in terms of our wanting to encourage development, light industrial, that area, do you have any recommendations for us as to what would make that area? Why would somebody want to develop in that area? Do you have any thoughts?
It is a good area with having access to two highways. I mean, obviously, with 149, you can get up to 94 pretty easy, and 20 and 12, and also with 6. So, the problem in the industrial market right now is that it's just so expensive to put infrastructure in for a developer that unless they have a lot of pre-solds or have a big user or something already lined up, the amount of money you have to spend to put in all the infrastructure makes it very risky. And so that, we have lots of parcels in the area that may have zoning and stuff in place, but without the utilities, it's still going to take quite a while to get the approvals and everything in place. So, so the more builder ready or developer ready we can make sites and, say that we're willing to work with people there, it certainly would drive more interest to that area.
Mike, you had a comment?
Just for your information, we did in the development department upstairs, we talked to some of the bigger utilities. It's well served around the perimeters.
Yep.
Both sewer, water, electric. Matter of fact, NIPSCO's going to be up there, electric, gas. But wouldn't that be the purpose of the TIF? Like you just said.
Yeah.
TIF could help with you.
That would entice a developer to move forward with it. So. The reason, and before this assignment or working with you guys for the last couple of years, I have worked with the owner on the corner, and there were plenty of inquiries for smaller parcels, like a 5 or 10 acre parcel. But to do that, you really should, to do it the right way, you need to engineer the whole site. You need to know where roads are going. And it's kind of one of those where the sale proceeds of a 5 or 10 acre parcel, you're going backwards substantially with your investment just to get one sale out of it, and then not knowing what other users are going to need. So industrial is a little more challenging that way. Residential, it's a lot more cut and dried because you have certain lot sizes and things like that will sell, so you can pre-plat that. But in the industrial, you can get users that need 2 or 3 acres. You can get users that need 20 or 30, and it's very cost prohibitive to go out and put all the roads in or try and guess what somebody's going to need.
Trust.
Would it be your goal that the exercise you're doing to find how many people would want to be in the big band, so to speak?
Yes. Yep. And that would give us, or give the council here a good idea of, are we looking at a 200 acre, 300 acre, or are there certain sections that are going to be blocked off? And the other thing I found being in this industry is that, even though the answer may be no today or not interested, 5 or 10 years from now, that could change if other things around there start developing and changing. So,
What would you say would be the most impactful thing that we as an RDC could do out of all the things that these property owners would want? What would be the top priority if we wanted to start chipping away at making it more desirable? What would be the top thing?
The biggest thing, if you're a developer, is getting the TIF set up so you can get reimbursed for the infrastructure that you put in. New businesses that come in, they're usually one of their main carrots is to have tax abatement.
Now we do have, it is a TIF, so
right. But those are the things that usually get interest or may draw them from one location to another. Even though there's plenty of traffic there, those aren't great commercial sites because it's more transit traffic. You know, and unfortunately, good, bad, or otherwise, you have a lot of the commercial use at South Haven, which is not far away. And then obviously by the time you get to Portage, you've got all the different types of normal commercial users. So from that aspect, I do think this area would be much better poised for a light industrial type development.
Light industrial.
Yep. Yep.
Like, what would be some examples of light industrial businesses that would find that area?
An interesting company that looked at it for a little bit. They were looking for about 15 acres, and they were a potential buyer of some of it. They were going to be in the kind of the RV like repair and storage area and stuff. And the nice thing with them, or it was attractive, unfortunately didn't materialize, is they didn't need road frontage. They could be tucked away in the back corner. They just needed land. They'd have screening and everything, but you know that's the type of user again that you know even a 50-acre parcel, if you're selling 2 and 3 acres at a time, it's going to take 16 users to fully build that out. Whereas if you get some 10 to 20-acre users, might get lucky and have 3 or 4 people, but which then cuts down on your road infrastructure.
Can I ask Dan then too, in terms of, by the way, do you know Dan? He's our financial advisor.
Nice to meet you.
And just asking Dan in terms of, just for Tim's knowledge, what can you just give, like, what would it mean to that business owner if they were to develop a business in terms of the TIF and helping? How long would that take potentially for them to recover the expenses and
for the infrastructure costs?
Yeah.
I'd have to understand the But if it was for on the front end, the financing was for the developer to put in the public infrastructure. That would be dedicated back. Is the incentive to a property owner. I don't recommend abatement after that. Only because now you're abating the taxes and there's a deduction. Abating the assessment, which translates into a tax saving, which reduces the amount of tax income generated. Which then doesn't allow to pay debt service back. So tax abatement, ARA deductions, and TIF don't work well together.
Let's only talk TIF.
Okay. So the incentive is that the infrastructure is put in on the front end, and the individual property owner pays for the tap in or the extension from the property line to their road. The road is already there. So you'll see that the example would be a Meriplex in Portage, whereas the infrastructure put in first, and then the site, the light industrial park, became more marketable because companies just needed to buy the land, build the building, infrastructure is already ready. That's a time frame.
Do we have any of the properties in that TIF area that don't have any roads into them whatsoever? So you'd have to get right of way or something to.
There are all different sizes of properties in there, and that's why, getting several to agree to go in together would make things a lot simpler. Some of them don't have much road frontage, but they have depth, and vice versa. So, and there's some small parcel. As low as 20 acres or so, and then up to a couple hundred. So,
and that's one of the things our office can help with is a conceptual plan, like we're talking. Once we know what kind of properties are in play, my fear is if we go work around the perimeters, did you ruin it for the people in the middle?
Right.
Whereas we could do some high level concept planning. Willing to do that out of our office. Now you got a mold to work with, as he's talking about.
It just seems like we have the chicken or the egg. We have to get something started that can actually kick it off, right?
Well, it helps with the master planning too, because then if roads will someday be extended, further south or north or west in this case. But it's a matter, like I said, of getting somebody the incentive of doing that. The other theory is that if you have that readily available, the approval time to approve projects like that, the lead time is so great that if you can get to the point where you have the infrastructure and stuff in, then you actually have something you can sell somebody. We get calls all the time in the business where somebody's interested, and whatever community it is, but they say we need to be open by, fall of 26, and you might look at that and say, well, gee, that's an eternity away. But by the time you go through approvals and put in some infrastructure, pull building permits, and actually build it, you might be scrambling to get in there 2 years from now.
Yeah. So, just since you were talking about the Ameriplex, do you see that as an attractive model? Do you see doing something like that in this TIF?
It is that Ameriplex has much bigger users than I think these sites would draw, and a lot of that is due to the proximity of 94 being right there at their front entry. So with Ameriplex, and ironically, I had financed it. I was back in for 17 years, and I had originally financed the infrastructure out there. But theirs was a bit different also because they put in some of the main roads, but they didn't really plot out flat lots of 5 acres, 7 acres. They kept it fairly fluid. So if you came in and your business needed 11 acres, and I needed 4 acres, they would basically try to position it where they could accommodate those different sizes without being locked into anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely it is a build it and they will come type of market.
Yeah. So if we wanted to create some sort of business park, do you think that in the people that you're talking to that you could get a configuration that would make that possibly work?
It could. Some of the challenges you run into, there's a few of the properties do have houses or their residents are located on it and stuff. So that's where it gets into a matter of timing, and the answer today might be no, but if something changes in 3 to 5 years and they want to move or sell, then they could be on board. But that's kind of the challenge with that is
okay.
There's a cemetery over there also.
Yes.
Anybody have any questions for Tim?
I think I agree with Mike. In order to get the owners possibly interested in this as a group, is have Mike come up with maybe a concept of what potential this could be. Show the roads. Don't have to lay it out in detail, but say this is the master plan. This is our thought for everything, and probably get a better result. Yeah, it's something to show them on paper.
Right. No, it is because it's not. You mentioned the word or TIF, and most people don't really understand what that is. And again, you're dealing with more of a commercial type use, which a lot of the people have used that property as a residence for years and never even thought of it as a commercial possibility. So that's why it does take a while. It takes a little bit of time to sink in as well. But like I said, what I found in the past, what gets our attention a lot of times is if you talk about future values and what it could do, and again, not saying you need to sell immediately or anything, but when that day comes, if you're a part of it, then the upside is there for you.
It seems like if we could just get it started, just overcome inertia and get it started, that would start to, okay, now somebody else will join, and then you get enough businesses in there, and pretty soon then it's self-perpetuating at that point.
Nothing brings more business than seeing new construction, so it's
yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Tim.
All right.
Look forward
Thank you.
to hearing your report.
All right. Thank you.
Talk to you.
All right.
Okay. I just want everybody to relax your brains because you're about to have it bend, because we're going to be talking about something that's relatively new, and that's a residential TIF. We've never done one before.
Right. Let me hand.
But Dan actually has been involved in a residential TIF, so he has a little bit. I have one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And the developer actually can't be here today, so today's meeting is all about making sure that we really understand this. And it's very complicated. It's very complex. It's not, so it's going to be a little mind bending for a while. We all were sitting there like, what? So don't feel bad if
no,
like,
please don't.
Bridget brings.
But ask any questions at any time. I'd be more than happy to fill in. So what I've handed out to you is, in general, tax increment pro forma of the Woods Edge Home Residential Development Program for tax increment financing in Porter County, Indiana, unincorporated. Just as a precursor, the developer presented a residential development subdivision of 93 units. Lots A and B were to be larger lots, anywhere from a quarter of an acre, with a value of about $650,000 a unit. I believe it was 46 or 47 units. They're both about the same. The C lots were to be smaller lots of about 0.17, 0.18 acres, and the homes on those lots would be about $500,000. So what we did was, in order to determine what the tax increment generated from this project would generate, we looked at the existing base assessed value of the property. The property is about 39.46 acres in total. Its assessed value, because it is vacant land, is $72,800, and it generates $1,237 in taxes a year. So that gives you a base of where we're at today. The developer has indicated that the 93 units would be developed at an average of 13 per year. Assuming my Catholic school math is correct, that's about 7 years to develop and build out the entire subdivision. Now, what we looked at the top as far as the assumptions on page 1 is the number of dwelling units, 93. As far as the land value itself, raw land dirt, is going to have an assessed value per acre or per square foot, depending on how the assessor looks at it. I did look at comparable developments, homes that were constructed within the last 5 years within a half a mile, to determine what the square footage of assessed value would be, and taking that by the average lot size, determined that the assessed value of all the land upon build out would be about $5.9 million, just the raw land. The assessed value of the improvements based upon the anticipated $650,000 A and B lots for the dwelling units and $500,000 for the C lots residential. That would generate or be assessed at about $47,500,000. So the total of the development would be about $53.4 million. That gives us a post-development picture based upon comparable data. What we then do is we look at, and all the information is broken down on the subsequent schedule. So on page 2, you'll find how the build out occurs, the dwelling units by A, B, and C lots, the average square footage, lot type, and the comparable information that was provided. So you can see the backup of how we determined the value as build out. On page 3 or A1, it shows the schedule of the home program year. Now that home program is important by citation, state citation under section 53 of the redevelopment law, states that a home program can only exist for a period of 20 years from the first date of an obligation. Now, I'm assuming this is not in stone, but I assumed an obligation December 1st, 2024. That's not actual, it's just estimated. So if the first date of the program year was December 1st, 2024, that means the last date of the home program year would be November 30th, 2044. That means that the assessment date applicable would be January 1st, 2044. And then the last payable year of taxes would be 2045. So you can see that gives us the parameters of when tax increment would be generated over a 19-year period from the base year date. So base year would be January 1st, 2024, 19 years of tax increment. On the next page...
Now, wait a second. You
Yes.
just saying 2045, but that 19 is...
2045. That's the 19th year.
But if
of
we-
tax increment financing.
But if we're looking at your chart on page A1, right?
Yes,
Okay, it says in first date of home program year, December 1st,
24.
22. On mine it says 2042. And then first date of home program year, November 30th.
Oh, I squared it at the top. It's highlighted and squared first date of the home program, first date of that particular year, December 1st.
Oh, okay.
And then it just goes by,
All right. So the assessment date.
yes.
Oh, okay.
So that translates to the assessment date, prior assessment date to that first date, the date the program year starts.
Can I ask one? Where is this? This Woods Edge residential housing? Is this?
It is located north of Route 30 from Hines, west of Hines Leonard Road, just
Hayes?
north of
Hayes.
Hayes Leonard Road, west, just north of Joliet.
Okay. Gives me an idea.
Right.
Thank
Good question.
Well, I'm sorry. I
I
apologize.
try to answer them all,
Thanks.
but I did look it up myself because I had to look it up just to make sure. But I did look at a radius of about a half a mile of new homes and comparable land values and home values to make sure.
Hey, Mike, is there any way that you can pull it up on that computer and show us?
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
And who owned who this?
Right now, it's owned by Woods Edge. They own it, developers. I mean, I can get you the actual ownership of the property.
Mike, have you driven Joliet
Mm-hmm. Got all that where they tore it up there?
where they tore up?
That's it?
North entrance. Have it, I think an entrance off Hayes Leonard.
That's it. Thank you.
It's currently owned. Name of the taxpayer is Woods Edge Valparaiso LLC, care of Mark J. Forst.
Forced.
Yes.
Thanks.
I did pull the property tax record on, so I'm doing my job. So if I look at page 5, what I did was identify for lots A, B, what would be the assessed value of the land, what would be the assessed value of the improvements at the 1% cap, assuming all the improvements are at the 1% cap. Now, in some instances, if you put in a pool, a shed, that might be a 2% or that, but predominantly it's going to be at the 1%
I think
caps.
it's changing that everything is going to end up being 1%,
Okay.
right?
Talking to me?
Yeah.
So we assume it's all 1%.
That's what I hear.
We
Okay.
hear that everything is going to be at 1%. So
And then it identifies the deductions that would be particularly available, assuming it's owned by the property owners. It would be a homestead standard deduction, which includes the mortgage deduction, as well as the supplemental deduction for the homestead. So you can see what we determined to be the gross assessed value for lots A and B, $650,000, and the deductions of $288,500. That's important because we want to calculate what the taxes would be on every parcel for each one of those A and B lots. On the next page, what is the importance of the next page is showing how the homestead deduction was calculated to get to the $240,500. Page 6. So that calculation shows how we got to determine the supplemental homestead deduction based upon applying the 35% of the first 600,000 and then 25% of the 600,000 or greater in assessed value, and that totals the $240,500 plus the $448,000. That's how it ties back to the previous page. Some people ask that question, how did you calculate the supplemental deduction? That's how it's calculated. And it's calculated based upon the assessed value percentages of the deduction for January 1st, 2027, because the state legislature has different percentages for the supplemental deduction for 2025, 2026, and 2027. Assuming these are first assessed January 1st, 2026 and forward, we use the 35% on the gross assessed value of 600,000 or less, and then the 625% on the 600,000 or greater. So that gives you an idea of how we got to the homestead deduction and the calculation of the deductions total and applicable. On page 7, what you'll see is an example of, now this is right off of how taxes are calculated for a property, and I matched it against similar properties, actual tax bill, and created the tax bill system here and how it's applied to show that your assessed value is the 650,000 minus your deductions. Net assessed value of the property is $361,500. Taxable property is divided by 100, so it's 3,615. The tax rate for Center Township 003, which is where this property is located, 1.6986. The total tax liability would be $6,140.44. There is a local option income tax, property tax credit that is applicable only to homestead property, which this is. That deduction to the taxes payable to the property tax holder would be $457. So their net tax liability would be $5,683. Now, of course, you have to apply that compare it against the circuit breaker, which is 1% of the $650,000 of the gross assessed value, which is $6,500. Because the Valparaiso Community School Corporation has voter-approved referendum rates, that is not included. By statute, that is taxed separately, so they are always receiving their full amount for that debt service. That has to be added in, so the circuit breaker cap would be generally $8,131. So your net tax liability is the lesser of A or B. So in the case of lots A and B, your tax liability on average would be about $5,700. I'll round it up to the nearest hundred. And what I did then is, on the far right corner, you'll see it on the right, is I took the assessment dates times the payable year, and based upon how the project would be built out as phased in, when phased in for after 7 years, and so for payable 2033, the total taxes off just the lots A and B would be estimated to be $261,500. Now that's important to know because that becomes part of the tax increment revenue pro forma. Now the same situation for lot C was done on the subsequent 3 pages. So for lots C, because those are smaller lots, their taxes would be slightly less at about $4,600 per lot. And at build out, the total amount of taxes would be generated annually $212,500. Now that we have that information, I can look. If you look at page 11, I can then apply that information. And if you look at year 1, 2026, page 2027, you'll see that the estimated property tax liability of $28,418. That's 6 or 7 homes built in that year assessed. 6 or 7 homes built and assessed for lot C, it would generate a total of $51,500. I have to reduce that by the base taxes for the property as it was before the allocation area was designated. That provides for a tax increment revenue of $50,270. Now that is the tax increment that's paid by the property owners. Now, because it's in an allocation area, the local option income tax, which is supported by the LOIT, that also goes to tax increment revenue. That amount comes to $4,287, so it's about $54,500 in year 1. But you can see where the year 6 is, that line. Everything after that, the project is fully built out. So by year 7, you're going to see the total amount of tax increment generated would be about $442,000.
So we basically are foregoing our lit also on these?
Yes. Right. Because that is the amount of property taxes that are paid to the units as a replacement credit for the gross tax liability. So it would be captured also. Now they'd still get the LIT, the local option income tax on the base value, just not on the incremental value. So we have to add that in. Sometimes.
On the Q and cap.
No, on all. So in essence, if you go back to the previous page, the amount of taxes on page 10, if you were to look at a lot C in general, their taxes would, my tax bill would show at $4,990.49. I'd receive a local option income tax credit of $371.33. That is the amount of taxes that the local option income tax pays on my behalf to make the total $4,990 in taxes. That's still tax increment financing. That goes to the Redevelopment Commission as tax increment, minus the little bit, because that $1,200 in the base, it's probably dollars of lit, not a
From
lot.
a practical standpoint, it would have no effect on what the elected officials see in their lit budget.
No. So you can see on page 11 what the total pro forma of gross tax increment to be distributed to the Redevelopment Commission, $7,275,000. I'm rounding up, just for purposes. Now you can see it's only going out 20 years or 19 years because the home program is a 20-year program, but the first year doesn't generate any tax increment because it's the base year. On the next page, you'll see I was asked to look at the tax increment revenue and from a pledge of 70% towards the development of the project as a financial incentive. 15% would remain with the Redevelopment Commission and 15% would be a potential grant to the Valparaiso Community School Corporation. That 70% would generate about $5,100,000 for potential incentivization to the developer. Now, that's assuming that $5,100,000 would be pledged towards an economic development revenue bond to incentivize the public improvements and infrastructure for the home program. On the next page,
Okay, that 70% was just arbitrary. So
yes,
we could potentially say 50% or 40% or 30,
whatever you agree upon as an incentive. On the next page, this is just disclosure purposes. This is not a municipal financial product. It's only for strategic and discussion purposes to identify a bonding capacity or what could be financially incentivized. So if you look in the column to the third column from the right, you'll see estimated project tax increment revenue, $5,092,119.24. That is the 70% of estimated pledge of tax increment. If you were to pledge that $5 million, you would generate about at 4.5% interest, just an estimate, over the 19-year period of tax increment distributions. You would generate a bond capacity principal of about $3,020,000. Now, from that, typically you're going to have a debt service reserve account that would be required. So at the bottom, you can see where that test is. That would be $281,000 that would have to be set aside in the event of a shortfall or any reason that
and who does that reserve?
That reserve becomes part of the principal. So it'll be on the next page.
Oh.
So if you look at the next page on page 8.2, it's titled Sources and Uses. You can see the sources of the funds. The main sources would be the bond proceeds, $3,020,000. Under scenario A, uses of the funds start first with to be paid from the bond funds. Capitalized interest. Capitalized interest is the money that's borrowed in your principal to pay the interest during the period that the project is not assessed or partially assessed to make the debt service payment. So you're borrowing money to make the interest payment in the years you don't have enough tax increment to make the full payment at 100. And we calculate.
Can you back up?
Percent covered.
Okay, we need a picture of who is issuing the bond.
Okay.
Who's responsible for the bond? How all the mechanics of the bond itself. So can you talk about that?
Yes. So in this case, Because it is an economic development revenue bond, not a true tax increment revenue bond with on the full district of the redevelopment district of the Porter County Redevelopment Commission. It is specific to this project. It would be my recommendation, and this is across the board, that the developer purchase this bond. They have to. It is not to be put on the open market. It is to be purchased by them.
And who do they purchase it from?
So in that instance, it's an economic development revenue bond. The Redevelopment Commission pledges tax increment as the sole payment of debt service. The tax increment generated, that $5,098,000, $5 million, whatever it was. There, you would be pledging that tax increment towards the repayment of the principal and interest on the economic development revenue bond. Because it's an economic development revenue bond, it is initiated by the county's Economic Development Commission to, and I have to check with bond counsel and local counsel, then it goes to the Porter County Commissioners or the Porter County Council to approve the issuance of an economic development revenue bond with repayment from the tax increment pledged by the Redevelopment Commission. It is not an obligation that is paid for from ad valorem taxes or taxes. It is a pledge of tax increment, meaning if there is not enough tax increment to make the debt service, the county is not in default. The developer just does not receive. The developer, as the project owner and bondholder, as they purchase their own bond, they would receive a full payment in that particular debt service payment date or maturity. So the county is not on, to use an old term, they're not on the hook or would be in default of any bond. It's solely payable from tax increment financing, tax increment revenues that you pledged as the Redevelopment Commission to pay the bonds principal and interest.
Now, you've said either the commissioners or the council. Do we? Which body?
I believe it's the commission.
It may be the commissioners. Yes, it may be the commissioners. I know in LaPorte County, I believe it's the council, but it's different in Porter County, the way the structure is statutorily. So I apologize. I should have looked that up before. So in this instance, the developer is buying their own bond as the project owner. So once the properties are sold, they pay their taxes. The taxes then generate tax increment. That tax increment is distributed to you as the Redevelopment Commission, specific to a Woods Edge allocation fund. When you receive a statement from a trustee or a paying agent for payment on the bond, whether it's on the pay semi-annually, I chose February 1st and August 1st. That gives you 30 days to 40 days from the time of distribution to the time the payment is due. Typically, you would receive that invoice statement or debt service statement 30 days prior. It's taken from the allocation fund, and only that allocation fund that's set up specific to this allocation area to pay the paying agent or the trustee. The trustee on February 1st or August 1st pays the bondholder, who is the project owner, who is the developer. They're buying their own bond. They're paying themselves back, in essence. So that's basically the cycle of how the money goes through from taxation to paying the bondholder back. But it's an economic development revenue bond, again, payable solely from tax increment revenue. It is not backed by a general obligation of Porter County. It is not backed by any other credit, any other ratings, just by tax increment that is generated from this project. And in that instance, we've looked at the again, $3,020,000 of principal, assuming the developer buys that, which they should. Capitalized interest, which is the interest that they would have in the principal that would pay when they're short because there is no assessment that is taxable or only partially taxable to make the interest payments. The debt service reserve fund, which was on the bottom of the previous page. Bond discount if it were to be sold on the open market, or in the instance that there is a bond discount for an underwriter. Cost of issuance is about $85,000. That's an estimate. That includes bond counsel, local counsel's costs, a municipal financial advisor. My costs could be rolled into that. And then miscellaneous costs just makes it around. if you look at miscellaneous on page A2, the only purpose of that is to make the project cost a nice round $1,000. That's all it does. Either at 1,000 or at $1,000. That's it. Which means after the cost of issuance, under scenario A, the developer would have about $2.2 million of project costs that they can use to offset their public infrastructure costs for the subdivision. Now, since under scenario B, assuming they buy their own bond and they waive the capitalized interest because they're only paying themselves for the interest during the time that it's not being billed, and the debt service reserve fund at 110% debt service coverage, they would then have a capacity of about 2.9 million, which in their initial letter, an email to the Redevelopment Commission was a request for about $3 million. I did not work these numbers to get to that same number. That's how they washed out at the end, based upon all the information that was shown. And it's all summarized on page one on the cover. Because at the bottom, also something to take into consideration is bonds typically have a service coverage ratio. In the instance of a developer purchase bond, it could be at 100%, it could be at 110, it could be at 125. If it's a bond marketed on the if it's a bond sold on the open market by purchased by an underwriter or sophisticated investor, it could be as much as 150% or 200% of the tax increment. The higher the debt service coverage, the less pledge of tax increment you would have, and that's due to the risk inherent in the development or the potential that it may or may not happen. And that is in the case of an investor buying the bond. Now, if the bond purchaser is the developer, they're investing in themselves, they can determine. I usually at that point look at it, there should be some percentage of risk that our numbers aren't going to be washed out exactly, because I don't know what the assessor is going to do, how they're going to assess it. I can only assume. So that 10% number is $500,000 over 20 years. That means that 10% surplus becomes the Redevelopment Commission's also, unless there's a shortfall, and I can get into the details. But if there's a shortfall, you could use that to make up the shortfall, or not. It's just there just in case there's a shortfall in any one year.
Okay, Dan, the really big burning question is,
Yes.
why would we want to do this? What's in it for us? It seems like a heck of a lot of work. It's very complicated.
Right.
We're locking up AV for 19 years and doesn't seem very attractive to us. So why would we even consider this?
Typically, redevelopment commissions, it's inherent in the nature of your authority to redevelop property and rehabilitate property. In this case, it's a redevelopment of property that is currently vacant. It is somewhat surrounded by residential development. It's been sitting there, years, undeveloped for some odd reason. So the Redevelopment Commission's charge and authority is to potentially incentivize the public improvements for development to occur in this area. Now, it is near the city of Valparaiso, so at some point in the future, the city may annex it. That potentially could happen, but it is a means of, for your purposes as a Redevelopment Commission, it is a toolbox to incentivize the developer to build in this particular location or to target development in this location. In addition, if tax increment is pledged towards the project, it also allows, because you have to have an economic development plan and a economic development area created, it allows you to have additional conditions beyond what the planning and zoning ordinance may have. So you can have conditions that are higher standards because you're financially incentivizing with tax increment dollars.
So this project has been underway for like 7.5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and they were ready to develop this, and all of a sudden, this legislation was created that allowed for residential TIFs. Right?
Correct.
So, and there's a bunch of developers right now that are developing subdivisions all over Porter County. So
throughout the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
Same.
And so I wouldn't say this is a blighted area or anything, and I really appreciated what you said when you first talked about residential TIFs and why entities want to do them, and it's really to get development in an area,
Right.
specific area that you feel should have development. And it's not like the RDC said, "Man, we really want to drive some development over in this map," which
Right.
might happen. Now it's gone.
So one thing to remember, Commissioner, is that the statute is clear that blighted is not not an accepted term in the citation. It is defined as an area needing redevelopment. Blighted conditions are no longer applied. Even though when I do a redevelopment plan, I will identify blight conditions, it is a statement or finding that an area is needing redevelopment, not blighted, just to clarify. So yes, it's not blighted, I would say it's, but blight can be determined as a vacant piece of parcel. A vacant piece of property is deemed to be blighted.
In looking at this map, where is the city limits?
I'm not exactly sure where the Valparaiso, it's near.
Give me a minute and I'll turn them on.
Okay. The second question would be, can they, okay, so it's still a ways to go, okay. So if,
Property right there, so it's within reasonable
yeah,
distance.
what happens if the city annexes in the middle of this process?
So
The city has attempted and doesn't have enough contiguity to do it under the statute. The subdivision will have city services, however.
right.
Okay.
If I may though, if at some point in the future the property were to be annexed into the city, my understanding of the statute is that the bonds would the tax increment generated from the property would still come to the Redevelopment Commission in Porter County.
Mm-hmm.
They would then transfer that tax increment to the Valparaiso Redevelopment Commission, who would then make the payment to the trustee. It's still your bond, it's still your tax increment, but you're paying it to the Redevelopment Commission of Valparaiso because technically it's in their redevelopment district. It gets a little tricky, but it is identified in the state statute for that, if that were to happen. It happened, as an example, it did happen in Lake County when the city of Hobart annexed South Lake Mall. That was unincorporated. Lake County had bonds outstanding for infrastructure. For Hobart, city of Hobart annexed it. What eventually happened there is Lake County paid off the bond from surpluses and early redeemed it, and then just turned it all over and said, "Here, Hobart redevelopment's yours."
And what happens if you're paying off the bond with the tax increments?
Mm-hmm.
Early on, you are paying off very much, right?
Correct.
So is this almost like a break-even chart? There's some place where you actually are catching back up? I mean,
where the principal and interest are the same?
But this is the key. You're hitting on a key point that is one of the hard points to get over. Let's make an assumption. The bond payment is it 281 on your sheet?
It's a levelized bond payment of about $280,000.
Let's call it
right.
$280,000 is due in two payments in 2026. If our captured AV and 70% thereof produces $120,000 payment, that's the payment.
okay.
Yes.
So
If they're really, really slow in building these houses,
it's not as if we are in arrears in 2026.
Right.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
and that's what I thought I was
but so
understanding.
they would have an incentive then to build these houses.
Yes.
And what I just told you is true.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little nuance to it there's a way to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
If there's years that are better down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, they're never getting more than they could have gotten. It's not like it does so well they get more than
No.
3 million, let's say.
Right.
Okay.
So
They're attempting to get there.
Yeah.
But whatever doesn't get paid we're not on the, no one's on the hook for.
Right.
Most importantly, Redevelopment Commission of the county.
It is the developer's responsibility to develop the property as quickly as possible to get as much assessed value on that property.
Because after 19 years, they don't get another.
After 19 years, it's done.
They're done.
So if
They actually,
is it possible that it's not paid off?
It happens on occasion, sure.
So if they decide that they all of a sudden want to build a bunch of, I don't know, glued together things they bring in on trucks.
Manufactured housing,
Yeah.
then you're not going to get a permit from the
Well,
building department.
But I mean, somewhere along the way, if they figure they can sell cheaper, smaller homes or whatever,
Then they would,
Or it just doesn't develop.
or it
Use up-
doesn't develop or whatever, we're not paying, and he's not developing, and the clock runs out.
Right.
Then he owns a bond that nobody's going to pay him back on.
so the project isn't developed, correct? And the trustee's sitting on $2.5 million. They've built some infrastructure. They're sitting on $2.5 million, but the debt service is still being paid. Then it becomes an issue where they are in, I'm maybe using the term incorrectly,
Yeah.
but they are in default or not meeting their project development agreement, which you should have a project development agreement in place before this all happens.
All right, let's
So that you understand.
One step back. If he does this bond, it's not as if he gets the bond will be meted out as the work that we have agreed to for the bond is complete. So it's not just sitting there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this money is for infrastructure. So before anything can get sold, this money will be put into the ground.
Mhm.
His problem won't be so much that it's still, could we possibly do the bond and he never gets the money from the trustee? Possible. The most reasonable example would be we do the bond, he takes the money, he puts it in the infrastructure in an attempt to get some AV built up to be able to get the capture to get paid back. If he never gets paid back in full and the 19 years elapses, that's it.
He's going to have.
If it only generates
'Cause
$4 million and they're short being paid 1.9, it's a write-off.
the other
Don't
key
worry
here
about
is because you're asking the question correctly as if there's somebody left unpaid. Okay? He's both sides of the transaction. So he's left unpaid.
Mhm.
There's not a bank out there
Mhm.
that we didn't make a payment to.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
True.
but as you said, all the expenses, we can make sure that everything that you're everything gets wrapped up in.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So what I would normally do in that case, Commissioner, is I track my costs
Yeah.
in hours specific to this project.
Yeah.
And I don't bill it. If it were to move forward, I would continue to track it as, for example, Woods Edge.
Yeah.
And then once it goes to closing, the trustee is going to ask, send me the invoice for your time. And say it comes in at $12,000, I issue that invoice with the time and it's paid from the bond proceeds, not from your general fund, which is to your advantage, as well as the commission's attorney, bond counsel. It could be the developer's attorney could be repaid from that.
Now, Ralph actually triggered a question. That is, if we do this, what's to keep every single developer going forward from wanting to do a residential TIF so they get their infrastructure costs covered?
That is the key question. Now, that is a determination and decision of the commission to identify areas targeted for redevelopment.
And
So
we never targeted this area for redevelopment, so
I'm not aware of any strategic plan to target unless.
I
I'm not aware of any strategic plan that targets a home TIF residential development program for a specific area. Now, I can use an example in the town of Burns Harbor. Years ago, I did prepare a strategic financial incentive strategy, whereas they identified areas for financial incentivization for various tax abatement or tax increment financing. If a company located in this particular area of Burns Harbor, you were eligible to submit for tax increment financing or tax abatement or both. But if you're outside that area,
but shouldn't we actually, before we even consider this, should we come up with criteria for properties that qualify for a TIF. Shouldn't we do that work first before we even consider this? Because we don't even know if
Right.
it's well.
And you may have that in your comprehensive plan for the county. I'm not.
Very well could be.
Yeah.
I'd have to look.
I mean, your comprehensive plan would be the county's targeted approach to residential development because it would show your future land use plan to move forward. The intent here, my opinion, my background is in land use planning, and
Our land use plan is over 20 years old, right? So it's not
2007.
what?
We had document 2007. We had documents subsequent to that. We had
Right.
full plans
Okay.
after 2007.
Okay.
but from a land use planning perspective,
Yeah.
And this reigns true out on the northwest coast. You would want to identify urban growth areas so you don't what's called leapfrog development. In this case, you're not leapfrogging residential development to go a mile and a half out to extend water and sanitary lines or infrastructure utilities. In this case, it would be, in theory, within an urban growth boundary, which over time is efficient land use to target. Would you rather have this 40 acres developed next to the city of Valparaiso, or would you rather have it located 3 miles south of Hebron, where they're going to have to extend all the utilities?
You could say that this is an infill versus.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So, in my opinion, this would be a proper use of targeting an urban growth area. From a land use perspective.
Are there any other residential TIFs in Porter County besides? I'm not familiar with residential TIFs.
I'm not familiar with one right now, but I'm working with two of them in the city of Portage right now.
You are?
Yes.
But there was a recent law change that made it easier. That's why we don't have.
Right.
But there aren't any that we know of that.
No, there are none through our RDC. None.
No.
The only TIF that we have through the RDC is the TIF up on US.
Residential.
But no other home.
Yeah, supposed to be like.
Valparaiso has done. They have some.
Have they? Right.
Portage is working on a couple.
Yeah. And it's just since effective date for the residential development home program, July 1st, 2023. So this is effectively the second year that it's been in place. And I believe it only extends until January or July 1st, 2027.
I'm just gonna say, are they planning to develop this regardless if this is a residential TIF?
The developer?
This development here, right?
I don't know.
Aren't they already clearing out that space?
I don't know.
Is that the space?
Mike, I think they're just doing portions of it, just get it open.
I'm sorry?
They're doing just portions of it.
Well, that's the clearing.
Percent of it, but
So they've already started.
just on the access that you see off of
Joliet.
it's limited to that, right?
But there's been.
I guess I'm just going to ask
construction.
My questions are a dumb question. I'm not familiar, but it's like the Brooks subdivision, the development on what is that?
On Vale Park. Vale Park runs through it.
Okay.
Is that? I mean, what benefit does the developer have? I guess what I'm trying to figure out, there has to be a benefit somewhere if not everybody's doing it, right? And I'm trying to, like, the question is, would everybody be doing this if they could, or why are some developers utilizing this law and some not?
I believe they're all going to start utilizing it.
What?
I believe that they're all going to start requesting redevelopment commissions for a home TIF program.
Because they changed the law recently.
No different.
It's a couple years old? Or
Yes.
Last year.
No different than if a light industrial manufacturing business were to come to Porter County, Portage Redevelopment Commission, Valparaiso Redevelopment Commission, whatever municipality, ask for tax increment financing for their project. It's just or tax abatement. They're just going to ask for every potential incentive they can request.
And Mike, the reason why it's more difficult is because when you add in, the reason why we have to have so many pieces of paper here to get to the projected assessed valuation is because you're dealing with residential homes. You got to impute homesteads, credits. We already have a 1% tax cap. TIFs work differently math-wise when you're dealing with a piece of industrial property that isn't limited to a 1% tax cap. Okay, these have that. So that's why we're dealing with reality, small numbers for a redevelopment commission. Because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
the incentive, I guess, to put it kind of in a paragraph is, you as the developer go put your infrastructure in by buying a bond and putting your buying your own paper to put the bond in. What you're getting is, over 19 years, you're going to get payments, partial payments, and payments along the way that will pay back a portion of the infrastructure that's going in. That's in the purpose of it, whether we agree or disagree, is that the hope would it would help with some money coming back to the developer over time, that would help with the pricing of these things moving forward. That's the goal.
Well,
Now the other incentive for us is on the pro and the con. The pro is we really don't have any financial, there's no loan we're backing, there's no loan payment to make if something fails. We do have page 1, gross AV. There's $53 million of AV that we would be sequestering, for lack of a better term, for 19 or 20 years. So that AV would be coming out of the calculation, which if it existed, would potentially lower our tax rate. Once you get into that side of things, though, you're into a whole lot of factors coming into what that AV does or doesn't do to the taxes. So this basically allows the developer, fingers crossed, to get some portion of the investment paid back over 20 years. One of the hidden incentives for us is that this puts a lot of pressure on the developer to get them built, get them on the rolls, because if they don't, their time is still clicking away. So if in 10 years they're only half built out, these numbers are going to look really bad for them.
Right.
Doesn't change us though.
Nope.
So that's kind of the pros and cons, and really it's $50 million of AV and the complicated effect that has.
Right.
I still think it would be to our benefit to actually come up with a plan and a strategy for properties that, I'm not saying get into the specifics, but that we have like a checklist that before we would even consider it, they need to meet certain criteria before we would even entertain a residential TIF, because it's so much work on everybody's
And
part.
that's at your discretion. My professional opinion as a
Yeah.
prior land use planner would be,
Yeah.
first criteria, are you within a quarter or a half a mile of any urban boundary?
Say that.
So that if you are within a quarter to 1/2 mile of an urban boundary, meaning the town of Burns Harbor, city of Portage, because you don't want to leapfrog development. Because eventually, as stated, over time,
Yep.
I can't say for certain, but Valparaiso's most likely going to annex this area at some
We've
point.
got
Then.
a few more things on our agenda.
I know we do.
We have about
I know.
15 minutes.
Right.
We want to have another meeting about
Yeah.
higher level scope of trying to decipher these out. We can, but
Okay.
I want to make sure everybody understands this, because next meeting we should have Woods Edge here to tell us their side of the story.
And so what you're saying is that this property actually meets your first criteria,
Right.
being within 1/4 to 1/2 mile of an urban boundary.
It's definitely within 1/4 mile. In fact, it's contiguous. It's not an annexationally contiguous property, but it touches a municipality.
Okay.
And in the meantime, I'm new. Let me look at the old comp plan document.
Okay.
All that for some.
Okay.
It definitely appears in the thoroughfare.
Okay.
Right.
Good. Alrighty. I thank you so
No,
much.
you're welcome.
Wow.
Ask any question. I enjoy answering them because
Yeah.
it provides education for the commission members,
Yeah.
but it also ensures that I'm doing my job.
Yeah.
So I think I've
It's
answered
like maybe we
99.
want to have another Zoom call or something in the room for anybody that wants to ask any additional questions before we have our next meeting. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Something like that.
Yep.
Great.
Sure.
Okay, can we move on to the Business Council Roundtable?
Sorry about that. Business Council Roundtable, all 12 townships have been contacted. The townships that have responded are Boone Township, Center Township, Jackson Township, Pine Township, Pleasant Township, Union Township, Washington Township, and Westchester Township. Now, some of the townships have responded with like 2 or 3 candidates, so we at this point have about at least 10 potential businesses within townships committed to the council. We did receive another township today that has 3 businesses, but they haven't been contacted, so I will contact them. And then you have township, Jackson Township. They haven't contacted their people, but I'll contact them.
Okay, I would really like to have them come to our next meeting, but I know we need to talk about Woods Edge again at that meeting, so I'm wondering if it would make sense for them to arrive at 4:45, and then we can have our initial conversation with them. What do you think?
Okay, we'll do 4:45 the September meeting.
And is that a council meeting day? Do you know?
Hang on.
And the 2 townships, we don't have a recommendation from our Porter and Portage at this moment.
You have 4. Liberty, Morgan was taken care of this morning, so that's 3. Portage and Porter.
I don't have.
All of them have been spoken to and sent at least 2 emails and had a phone call. So we're just wait and see. Give them a little time.
Council meeting is September 24th.
And when is our next meeting?
And your next meeting,
September 24th.
or yeah, September.
No. Alrighty. Okay, so when they come, then we're gonna have to be really diligent about being intentional and about what we want to talk about. And I'm really hoping that initial conversation is just to get to know them and invite them to be a part of it, because what we are trying to do is to not have the typical businesses. Everybody, the business owners, they're always part of everything, but these are business owners that typically are not part of the mainstream, and they can actually potentially give us some really unbiased information about their area and potential recommendations of things that could help businesses in that area. So we should have good representation from all over the county, right?
I think we're going to have very good representation. I think we're going to make it.
Mm-hmm. And then let's jump into the St. Joe County tour.
I think, Mike, were you at the last meeting?
I've had so many, I don't know which meeting.
What'd you have for breakfast? Most of you were here before. I'm moving this thing more like end of September, early October.
Okay.
On a gliding schedule. So the instructions are I'll be sending a doodle poll out on Sunday or Wednesday or Friday. Before we can make it, we'll decide from there what date.
And do you just, for whoever, just as a refresher as to what the intent of this is and kind of the agenda for the day?
Moderate sized projects, some that you might be faced with in Porter County that St. Joe RDC has done, as well as we'll take a peek at that month.
Is that Thursday meeting?
I'm sorry?
You talking about the Thursday meeting? Your Thursday meeting?
No, this will be on a Wednesday or.
No, the last meeting. I don't know.
Oh yeah, the last RDC.
Okay.
So it's a field trip. We'll get a bus and we'll have lunch and all that. It'll be a day trip.
What would, Mike, in terms of, would a Friday work for you? Being able to go?
I'm flexible, whatever group it.
No, I'm talking about Mike Brickner.
You're looking at me.
What's the date?
A Wednesday or a Friday? What would be better for you, a Friday?
Sometimes Wednesdays are usually consistently better for me.
Oh, okay. Well, Mike Jabo is going to be sending out a doodle poll, and so people can pick what days work. What? Oh, did we skip this? I'm sorry, we skipped the school grant program.
The school grant program, Dr. Elenas has been given the application. She responded and said she's very excited for the opportunity to discuss potential grant funds. She has created a team. She has her team looking at the application, and she's going to get back with some thoughts. And so when she shares that, I'll get that back to you.
Great. Okay. Any public comment? Barry, come on, one of these days. Alrighty, our next meeting will then be Tuesday, September 24th, 2024 at 4 p.m. and we are in recess. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I know.
Hey, Mary Jane, would you have an extra copy of the financial